Hello everyone, I'm Milo and welcome to my town. Well, it is that time again, end of the year. The holiday season, a time to relax and look back. And as it's a tradition at this point, I'm sharing my list of top games that I played during the year. 2024 was a decent year for gaming, I would say. I think the good stuff managed to outshine the bad ones. And I myself had a good time enjoying the games this year. So once again I wanted to share the games that I experienced this year in the ranking that I give them from my perspective. Once again, please remember that these are simply my own opinions, and what I played almost certainly differs greatly from what the average person played on this year. So do feel free to comment and share your own thoughts as well. By the way, I'm still a little bit sick, so if my voice is raspy, that's the reason, but I really wanted to get this out in time. So without further ado, let's begin. Number 10. Murder by the Numbers. So this is a game that I had in my radar for at least 2 years or so, and I finally got the chance to play this year. I'll tell you one funny story. For whatever reason I found this image on Google that showed an edit of a Nintendo DS version of this game, and for several months I genuinely thought that this was originally a DS title. I even made a post on some thread asking about it, and then some person said, "Hey, this game never released for the DS, what are you talking about?" My fault in there for not properly checking at the time, but I genuinely believe it was an old game. It's not that old. This game was made by Mediatonic, which is the persons that made Fall Guys, and it's an interesting take of a visual novel combined with Picross. So pretty much the main thing of the game is you are like a rookie detective. In reality, it's like a movie star that plays a detective, but then she ends up actually trying to get into a rookie detective work after meeting some robot. And I like it how they mix the gameplay of Picross, because the robot is supposed to be scanning the environments, and then you solve Picross puzzles to help you locate items and clues and whatever. So it's mainly a Picross game, but you have an added story that is presented in a visual novel style to it. I enjoyed the novelty of it, and as a small fan of Picross and of course a big fan of visual novels, I enjoyed playing through it. Now I'll be honest, I think the Picross factor sometimes interrupts the story a lot. Trying to focus on both was a little bit weird, but at the very least I did enjoy the game. It's not like incredible, but it's cool enough, and again, shape up a little bit of mystery and some fun Picross. I enjoyed my time with it. Number 9. Mirror's Edge Catalyst. So here's a fun study as well. I had never even planned to be playing this game this year. The truth is there were some new releases upcoming and lined up, so that if I played a certain game, it would be like enough time while I played it, so that another release that was coming afterwards, it would line up right if I planned and did my time correctly. The problem is that first game that was supposed to come out, the store that I buy from didn't manage to get it in stock for like over a month. So I gave it some days to see if they got it. When they didn't, I filled in with something else, looking through my Steam library, because I wanted to use my time and play something in the meantime. And I ended up picking Mirror's Edge Catalyst. I played the original 4 years ago and bought Catalyst sometime later, and I just hadn't had the time to play it. Funny enough, this game is actually a reboot of the franchise, if you would call it that. I thought it was a sequel, but no. And it took me a little bit of time while playing to actually realize that they had pretty much retconned the story, so it's actually a reboot. In terms of gameplay, you're still doing parkour stuff, but this one is interesting because you have like an entire city hub where the game takes place. So while you're not in active missions, you have like a big world with zones that keep opening up, and for you to explore, get collectibles and all that stuff. I enjoyed that because the previous game was presented in the mission type of progression, so every mission was in a different place, and you know, the objectives were mainly the same, parkour and some combating here. But here you had an actual like hub. You could get familiarized with the places, even though, well, it's not like it's incredibly distinct, but still you could recognize some of the areas. And usually the main missions do take place in specific areas unique to them, but then there's a bunch of side missions, collectibles and all that stuff that take place within the main expanding hub that you can go through, and visiting that was really cool to me. It has a bigger emphasis in combat than the previous game had, if I'm not mistaken, and the combat is not that great, I'll give it that. I think it's one of the biggest flaws, but the parkour felt really good and I actually like the exploration a lot. So again, a welcoming surprise, because I wasn't even planning of playing this game anytime soon, but I ended up doing it and I actually enjoyed my time with it a lot. Number 8. Another Code Recollection. Another Code, or Trace Memory as it was known in America if I'm not mistaken, was an old Nintendo DS game that I had always heard it was considered a cult classic. It was visual style, I guess, adventure type. To be honest, I never really saw much gameplay of it. I was just like recommended it and I had it on my radar to maybe try it out sometime, but I never did. It was quite surprising when I saw and recognized the art style and the character. I think it was last year when they announced that they were doing a remake of not just the first game, but also a second game that was on the Wii, which if I'm not mistaken was never localized into America. I think it was only in Europe, and I wasn't even aware that it existed. So the entire franchise that game was, the Another Code franchise, got ported over to the Switch with this remaster or remake. I was quite pleased with these games. In fact, I am a bit curious about checking out the original DS game, because in this one you explore like a fully 3D environment. You have to go around, find clues, solve puzzles, and piece together this story. I mean, I'm not gonna spoil about it, but yeah, I mean, I had a good time with it. Again, I knew that it was like a bit of a classic. I had it in my radar but hadn't tried it out, so when they released this remaster I was really up to it and was really excited to try it out. I would say the first game, this story is like not super strong, but still enjoyable. The second game delves more into the past of the protagonist and what led to her story. I mean, without spoiling much, there's like a device that the parents of the protagonist did that's like to look into memories, and then the sequel delves more into like the research that went into all of that. It expands more because the first game only takes place in like a secluded house in an island, like I mentioned, while the sequel is more like in an entire like big lake area with many facilities and stuff. So I enjoyed it a lot. Again, I knew nothing about it, I think I've already mentioned it, but I had a lot of fun. Like, the story isn't super incredible, but it has its moments, especially towards the end of the second one, which pretty much wraps up the entirety of the duology at that point. Number 7. Sankey Zero Last Beginning. If I had to describe this game, I would say it's kind of like a hidden gem. This game was made by Spike Chunsoft, so if you know me, you know that I enjoy their works a lot. And I discovered it about 3 years ago when a friend had played it and I saw on their Steam activity. I asked them about it and they told me that I would probably enjoy it, given that we had similar tastes in visual novel stuff. Of course, being a Spike Chunsoft game, that's kind of what it is, but that's not everything about it. It is kind of a visual novel stuff, and it is actually quite similar to Danganronpa on its setting. Pretty much a set of individuals wake up in an island alone after what seems to have been the end of the world. Some characters in a TV show tell them that they are the last remains of humanity and that the earth has been wiped, and that they have to take up the mantle of restoring the earth. A little bit progresses in the story, and then the characters themselves find out that they are able to be revived when they are killed, since they got some sort of device installed on their bodies that holds all their memories and allows them to be revived as clones. So with this concept, this game is actually like a dungeon crawler type of thing. The dungeons aren't random like I think a lot of this genre tends to be. Instead, they're set, but you move in a grid-based system. It's really interesting, and I had really never seen anything quite like it. As you move around the different areas and dungeons in this grid-based space, you're in first person and you battle out enemies like these. You have to solve puzzles that have to do with the terrain or items, interactions in this vein. There's even boss fights. You have to manage your party. There's inventory, resource bank, crafting systems. It has a lot of stuff, so I will say again, I was quite impressed by it. And I'd say that like a hidden gem because honestly, this pretty unknown from what I can hear. It's similar to 42H with Scramble, which I swear I'll make a video on it someday because it's my favorite visual novel, but it's kind of like hidden like this. Now I don't know if it's one of the reasons, but I didn't mention it yet, but when you revive as clones, there is an aging system, so you first start up as a child, as some days pass you become an adult, then middle-aged, and then an elder. There's different benefits and roles that benefit being at specific ages, and your combat prowess changes based on that. And after a certain amount of days, your characters will just die and you have to revive them again. So you have to manage your team in these ways, and I think it's pretty fun. I enjoyed it a lot. Again, did not expect anything like that, and I was heavily surprised. I know it's number 7, but trust me, this one was one of the ones that I enjoyed the most. So if I'm talking this highly about this early in the ranking, you can only see how much I enjoyed the games that preceded. For number 6, I will mention that I tried to keep my bias to a minimum here and try to be a little bit objective about ranking this, because if I had really gone with my bias, it probably would be much higher. But for this spot, I am giving it to 2 games, but mainly 1. I'm talking about Yakuza 4 and 5. So I played these games during this year. If you saw my videos that I uploaded on the channel, then you'll know that I made extensive videos for both games. It's no surprise that I am a big fan of the Yakuza series, and it is my personal goal to strive for to 100% complete all of them. I am working on this and have gone through it so far. Well, I of course enjoyed both of them. I think this spot I'm gonna give it specifically to Yakuza 5 and have 4 not take up another slot, just for the sake of convenience and covering more topics. So Yakuza 5 was actually quite the experience for me. I think it has a really good mix of story. It is very long, and I know some people may consider this a negative, but honestly for me, if for the same amount of money that another game costs, I'm getting more content out of a game, I always consider this to be more worthwhile my time and like better value. So I like that, and the story I like too. It has a lot of emphasis on Haruka as a character, which, as you may know, I'm a big fan of. You play as her, you play as 4 different characters, and well, you go to 5 different cities. There's a lot in the game to unpack from every single angle that you look at it, and I really enjoyed it. But I'm still debating whether or not I think it's my favorite one. That spot belonged to 3 before. Either it's 5 now or they are shared. But well, again, not gonna go deep into it because I've already made 2 gigantic videos about both of these games, but this spot's mainly for Yakuza 5. And again, I didn't consider too much bias into it so that I could present more variety and rank higher some other stuff, but that's what it is. Number 5. Splatoon 3 Side Order. This is the DLC for Splatoon 3. Specifically, it's the story expansion or gameplay side of it, because the first pack of DLC was just the lobby of Inkopolis Plaza, which was just a cosmetic thing, if you would say. So I would consider Side Order to be the real DLC, much as how Octo Expansion was. This was a really enjoyable and welcome change to the Splatoon formula. So, as it's common for the Splatoon single-player campaigns, you are going against CPU opponents. But this time they took a very unique approach because it's actually based on a roguelike system. You are pretty much ascending a tower of different floors. In each floor you are going to be able to pick up a power or a modifier to your kit. You begin with a weapon, and as you progress you get access to different weapons, so depending on which weapons you have, a certain power may be more effective, or some specific skills that apply to that type of weapon will be able to be found. And what you need to become is, gather all these skills that you can, become more powerful in your kit, because as you go on, the floors get harder, there's more enemies, they swarm you more, they have more effects, and you need to defeat them in order to progress. I really enjoyed it. My problem with it is that I think it's a little bit too short. My problem was there were like only 3 bosses, besides like the main boss that you will find at the end. That left it to be a little bit underwhelming in my opinion, because you will always be facing 2 out of those 3 possible ones as you ascend through the tower. I think if there had been a bit of more bosses, that could add to a variety. Now each of the bosses will be a little bit more powerful depending at which floor you find it, but still only having 3 total was a little bit weak for my consideration. Still, I enjoyed it quite a lot. I mean, it was the number 1 spot when I played it, but that was like in February, so it's not like that's too much, but still I like it too much, though other games across the year definitely overtook it, as you will later see. Number 4. The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom. When they announced this game and then they unveiled that the protagonist was Zelda, I was quite impressed. They were finally given the protagonist of the title of the series her time to shine. And she of course controls a little bit different than Link. She doesn't really fight herself, and the main gimmick of the game is that you can acquire these copy abilities or copy items. They're called echoes. They can be just regular furniture like beds or tables that help you mainly traverse through the terrain, or enemies that help fight for you. Now the game also has like a sword mode that pretty much transforms you into Link, and it's a little bit more powerful, but it is like temporary, or you need to keep replenishing a gauge to be able to use it. Still, playing with the echoes was actually quite fun, and the level of puzzle solving that has is pretty interesting. There's some mechanics that you can use depending on what summon. There could be different properties that a specific enemy or thing or item has, and you can use that to interact with the environment. So the way that I approached the puzzle summon with this was really cool. I think the game's like 30 to 35 hours. It's like not insanely long, but I found it to be the perfect length, and I really had a blast with it. I 100% that it is not that difficult. It was really fun to just explore this new world, and I was quite pleased by what they did with it. Before I move into the top 3, I will do a brief mention, honorable mention of the games that didn't make it into the top 10. This is actually almost all of the games that I played in this year. So the first one would be the Raincoat DLC Master Detective Archives Raincoat. If you would recall, in the video that I made about it, I mentioned that there were some DLC chapters that released in waves. I believe they stopped releasing, like the last one released about a year ago in December, and during this year I took the time to finally delve into them. They're not that long, honestly. You do get to play as some of the other characters in the game, but they're like these really short chapters that are like an hour tops each. They're a little bit fun stories, I will admit, and they give more into the personalities of the characters as you go and play as them. But they're not that big, and they're not that influential either. That's why they didn't make it into the list. Like, they were there at one point, but then other games kicked them out, as it was expected. I played the Milk Outside a Bag of Milk. Probably you've heard of this game. It's a really short visual novel. It's not super incredible, but it's kind of cool. A little bit of a dark story game. And also the Pokemon Violet DLC. So technically speaking, the second wave released at the end of 2023, and I did play it during that end of the year period. I enjoyed it a little bit. Like, they do more emphasis on like double battles, which they never really do, but they don't really experiment too much for it. And again, they maybe should do that on the main game still, because I enjoyed more like exploring the new area. That was really cool, and they brought a lot of new Pokemon. So yeah, I like that, but like, okay, I don't think enough to really rank it. So those would be the honorable mentions. Now let's move on with the real top 3. Number 3, Mario and Luigi Brothership. I'm not sure if I've ever mentioned this in the channel, but I am a big fan of the Mario and Luigi RPG series. My first was Partners in Time, and I haven't played the first one, but ever since I played almost all of them and completely adored them. Monsters Inside Story is one of my favorite games of all time, I guess, and a really good RPG at that. So, when they announced that they were making a new game for the Switch, I was quite surprised because Alpha Dream, the developer for the original games, actually went bankrupt some years ago, so I thought that any dreams of a future Mario and Luigi title was just completely gone. But truth is that they made a new one. I'm not too sure if any of the original Alpha Dream developers are actually related to this project at all. Maybe they are, I'm not too sure. I don't even remember which is the developer that they made because they don't list it. But I think they actually managed to capture the Mario and Luigi formula and essence pretty damn well. The story is actually very cool, and I think it's probably the best one in a Mario and Luigi game so far. They have a vast cast of characters that, if you know the Paper Mario effect where they just kept using just generic toads and people dislike that, this game has none of that. We have a new race of people, I think they're Concordians because the world is called Concordia, and they are all pretty distinct on the main characters. As you progress through the game, the roster of main and principal characters just keeps growing and growing, and the game's about like bonds, and it just shows here that even the characters, they made a great job on developing them. It's really cool. Combat wise, it's Mario and Luigi. I mean, those are basics that have been established and they work really well. Bros attacks are cool, they nail the battle system, they have a sort of plug patch system that helps you through the game. I found it quite enjoyable, honestly, and quite heartwarming as the story goes by. I really enjoyed it. As a fan of the series, I am quite glad that it turned out like this, and who knows, maybe for the future we can have even more games. Number 2. Ace Attorney Investigations Collection. I cannot tell you how incredibly excited I was when they finally unveiled this game. Of course, you may know that Ace Attorney is among my favorite gaming franchises of all time, has been for like over a decade. So when they finally announced that the only remaining game that was like eluding any more platforms, but specifically had not been translated officially to English, was finally getting that long-awaited translation and release, I was ecstatic. This is the game that I mentioned previously in Mirror's Edge Catalyst that didn't come here in time, so that released like in early September, but I couldn't get it until like October, the beginning of October. But oh my god, the wait for it was worth it because I had a blast. I had played the original Ace Attorney Investigations 1 like 11 years ago, but for the sake of consistency I went ahead and played it in this collection again. Of course, it had been a lot of time, I didn't remember every single detail from the game, though I still remembered the main conflicts and characters and even twists. Well, not all of them, but still, it was pretty enjoyable again going through it again, and then actually playing 2 for the first time. To be honest, the very reason that this game's in number 2 is because of the second game. That game is insane, they do a great job, the music is great, the new characters that they introduce is great, the whole story is great because every single chapter is completely linked to each other. In the first game they technically are, like, they all build up to a greater case, but I feel like how they do it in the second game, they're way more concise and cohesive. Everything happens like almost sequentially, and it builds up into this bigger story that eventually concludes with the game. I just adored it. Some of the new characters are great, and you know, part of me now wishes that some of these characters that we got in this game hopefully appear in a future Ace Attorney game, you know? Again, with this game, we finally have every single game besides the collaboration with Professor Layton in modern platforms. The entire franchise can be owned in almost every modern platform, which is insanely good. So we're only looking out for a potential Ace Attorney 7 down the line. I'm willing to give Capcom some time with it, but hopefully they do deliver, because I think now the Ace Attorney franchise is at its ever top popularity than it's ever been. Maybe, I'm not too sure, like it's definitely way out there in the mainstream. So that's great, and as a fan of it, I couldn't be more happy about it. So that's why I took my number 2 spot. And for number 1, the game is Disco Elysium. Maybe you are surprised. To be honest, I am a little bit too. At the very least, since the last 2 years that I've been doing this, and maybe even before I even made these lists, it is the first time that I would consider my game of the year a game that didn't even release on that year. But that's how insane Disco Elysium was of a game. You may have probably heard of it because it definitely got a lot of awards and praise a few years back, but having experienced it now myself, I can totally see and agree on why that was. Disco Elysium is mainly a narrative game, so kind of visual novel if you could say. It takes a perspective of a top-down game where you move your character and there's a lot of conversation and topics. I think it's a little bit hard to explain, but I'll try my best. Pretty much you have to choose from your character at the beginning a type of personality. You can be like more aggressive or more logical, or you could even mix and match whatever. So depending on what you choose, you'll have different emotions be deriving your thoughts and your conversations with people. You are a detective that wakes up from a hangover and have to solve a case in an isolated part of town that you have been sent to. You start with like no knowledge and you have to go from there, but the game is narrative beauty. It's how I could describe it. And the reason that it's so high, like I couldn't even get myself to say that Ace Attorney 2 was better than it, because this game just has so much poured into it. Like if you play it, you'll see that there's like a political alignment that goes alongside it as you play. Depending on the choices that you keep making, it kind of takes shape of that. Different things open up depending on your thought process, so there's even branching stuff. I know for a fact that I didn't experience everything in the game. Heck, if I experienced like 30% of it, that's at tops what it is, because there's so much branching on it. So on its own, I know that the amount of writing that is in this game is insane, and all of it is voice acted. Just thinking about the sheer size that this game has is what makes me value it so much, and what makes me give it my number 1 spot of game that I played this year. My game of the year, pretty much. Just the respect for the people who made it and for the incredible thing that they crafted. It's what makes me give it this spot. I don't really know if I'll ever get to see some of the other routes that I didn't play. I was planning to when I played it, but it took me like 80 hours or so, and I also wanted to play some other stuff. So maybe I'll just keep it with a high note that there's a lot more stuff in that game that maybe or maybe not I will ever experience, because it does take a good amount of time to get through them. So, but that only makes me value it even the more. And that's why I gave it my number 1 spot. But wait, there is another thing. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say this is another top 1 or the actual top 1, and it honestly came as a surprise because up until like 2 days ago from when I'm making this, my list was already set in stone. But then I finished this game, and I think it would be disrespectful for me if I didn't at least mention it. And I'm talking about Yakuza 6, The Song of Life. Yes, I know that I already mentioned 4 and 5, which I played earlier in this year, but I happened to be playing 6 in this past week during December, and well, I think I said it would be a disrespect to me if I didn't name it. One, because it's still in this year, so I probably wouldn't include it next year, but the story of the game is the end of the Kiryu saga, or was the end of the Kiryu saga for many years, until they picked it up back again in Gaiden a few years back. And the story is quite influential, emotional, and holds a lot of weight for the entire Like a Dragon, Ryuga Gotoku, or Yakuza series at this point. Now again, I'm not saying that this is another number one, I just wanted to mention it as a bonus because I didn't really want to modify the list that I had already. And the game on its own, it's a little bit hard for me to really rank because the story is like insanely cool, but then it falls in the gameplay and features category. Like there's some stuff that's missing from previous titles. I will make another video really detailing about this game and the entire franchise up until that point, so that's for later, but at the very least I wanted to mention it here because I wouldn't feel good with myself if I didn't. But that is now really the end of my list. So what do you think? Again, I tend to mostly play older games more than new releases. That tends to be a trend with me, mainly because I have a massive backlog, so I'm always trying to catch up, but I am getting there. I hope you enjoyed. Again, do remember that these are my opinions, so of course yours may vary. Feel free to leave a comment of what you thought of what your games were of the year, what you like the most. If you agree or disagree, can make a discussion about it. And that's pretty much it for me. So happy holidays, happy new year, Merry Christmas, and we'll see you next year. I will try to be a little bit more active on the channel, though I'm not too sure how much I can really succeed in that, but we'll see. For now, don't forget, you'll always be welcome in my town. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.